Sex on campus has become a highly charged subject, and in the U.S., to deal with what's been controversially called rape culture, federally mandated rules exist to stamp out actions that would contribute to a, quote, hostile environment. As cultural critic Laura Kipnis found out, questioning those rules can be a very risky proposition. Pilloried and prosecuted under those rules, her new book is called Unwanted Advances. Sexual Paranoia Comes to Campus, and it takes aim at all that she finds wrong at post-secondary institutions today. Laura Kipnis is a film professor at Northwestern University near Chicago, and she joins us now for more. It's great to finally meet you.
You too.
Yeah, you've been on this program before, but always,
remotely. As I said, I was staring into the void last time we talked.
Well, stare into my eyes now. It'll be better this
I will
time.
do.
Let's go back. A couple of years ago, you published an essay in the Chronicle of Higher Education called Sexual Paranoia Strikes Academe. Let's just start with that, because that kind of sets up the book. What was the point you were trying to make in that piece?
I should say that I never thought people were really going to read that essay, so I had some fun with it. I was asked to write about campus sexual politics by the Chronicle, and there had recently been this ruling that had come down from the officials on my campus saying that professors and students could no longer date, even if they were in different departments or different schools in the university. So I decided to have a little, mock that a bit and talk about the fact that on most American campuses, all I would say, you can barely throw a stone without hitting a couple that originated in a professor-student relationship who now, in many cases, have been married for decades and have kids. So this ruling seemed to me incredibly hypocritical. So I started there and proceeded to run down many of the other hypocrisies that seemed to be striking sexual culture, and also this increasing air of vulnerability that students seem to feel regarding anything to do with sex.
Well, let's do a sort of on the one hand, on the other hand here. Because
Okay.
on the one hand, you've got consenting adults. If you've got a male professor's 35 years old, female student who's 23, 4, 5, whatever, they're consenting adults.
If someone's over the age of consent, that should be a consenting adult.
However,
yes.
There's the other side of the coin, which is to say, he is in a position of power over her. He can determine her future, particularly if he's her professor, and therefore there is something vaguely not kosher about that. You don't see that?
I certainly do not think anyone should date where one person is in a position of grading the other person. No. But there are in life all sorts of power differentials and hierarchies, and we all have to learn to navigate those. And I also think as a feminist that even though these codes are written in gender neutral language, what they are really doing is depriving women of the ability to consent. And we have fought for decades and generations to win the right to be seen as consenting adults in sexual and erotic matters.
I don't normally ask personal questions, but you mentioned it in your book, so I'm going here now, okay?
I did mention it.
You did mention it, because you've done it, right? You've dated.
Done it.
Now, when I say done it, I mean you have dated students.
Well, here's the way to talk about this that's a bit less
inflammatory.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, this was many decades ago as I was starting out as a junior professor, and the person in question was actually the same age as I was, and we were in different parts of the department. I had no supervisory power. So just to slightly let myself off the hook, but which is to say that, in many of these cases, to say later, oh, there's been some abuse of power is not to take into consideration the variety of situations people find themselves in.
But if two people find themselves obviously in the same post-secondary institution and they share a love of whatever particular,
subject.
Yeah, I mean, it seems not beyond the realm of possibility that they may want to, they share a connection, they may want to hook up. So I want to be sure I'm clear on what you're saying. Are you saying it's a good idea under those circumstances for professor and student to get together?
No, I'm not promoting these relationships, but what I'm saying is that I don't think it's the place of the university to regulate them, and that this layer of regulation that has come into being it sort of misidentifies the kinds of problems that are happening, and also ends up putting students, women students particularly, in a more vulnerable position, because if we're relying on regulators and administrators to adjudicate these things, we're not learning to operate in the world with sexual agency and a sense of self empowerment, for lack of a better word.
The reaction to your piece was stark, right? Students protested. What were they protesting exactly?
Stark or messy or something.
Yeah.
Students staged a protest carrying mattresses and pillows, which was a reference to the Columbia student who got known as Mattress Girl for going around carrying a mattress on the Columbia campus. So they said that I had created a hostile environment on campus and I was supporting rape culture, and they demanded that I be censured, I guess.
What did the administration do?
I think they, at that point, did nothing. I heard no official word from anyone about this. It happened that I was having coffee with a journalist in New York, and she was the one that told me I was being marched on, which was a shock. So I think my university does support academic freedom, but we can go on to the next, the thing that happened next, which complicates matters.
Well, all right, do you want to pick up the story? Go ahead. I mean, I was going to go somewhere, but what the
Well, I
heck,
was just going to say, to fill it in, so then two students brought me up on charges for writing this essay, what's known in the U.S. as Title IX complaints, which is a federal...
You know what, I got it here. Why don't I just say what it is? Because, since we're here already. Here's Title IX. It says that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Now, my recollection of this thing when it came in, I guess almost 40 years ago now, was that it was designed to get rid of the discriminatory funding that women's sports often faced,
right.
As it related to men's sports.
Yeah.
And it did a lot of good to improve the prospects for female athletes.
Yeah.
But what's it turned into here?
So I got this letter in my email inbox saying I've been brought up in these Title IX complaints, and like you, I had no idea what it was. So it turns out that in 2011, the Department of Education expanded the scope of Title IX from simply gender discrimination to include all forms of sexual harassment. Or creating some kind of sexual climate, sexual misconduct on campus.
This is the Federal Department of Education made this decision.
Yes, and my writing an essay was seen by these two students as it was a possibility to expand Title IX. I think way beyond what anybody thought its scope should be. But part of the issue is that anybody can do this because partly this climate of sexual paranoia that I was writing about in that first essay and continue to write about makes people think that weaponizing Title IX is an adequate means to address such things as people's feelings of vulnerability on campus.
So you got this complaint from these students. What happened then?
There was a 72-day investigation. The university brought in a team of lawyers, of outside lawyers from another city who were flying in to investigate me. And they ended up producing 2 single-space 60-page reports on me in which they essentially cleared me of this. I had almost wished they hadn't, because I thought if I was brought, if this went forward and I was found guilty of writing an essay, it would put Title IX under public scrutiny in a way that I actually think it should be, because it's become such a stretched and elastic, for a weapon. So I unfortunately was let off.
Well, you say unfortunately was let off, but on the other hand, I think technically speaking, you're not really supposed to comment on what goes on in this investigation.
Well, so I was the first person, so I wrote a second essay for the Chronicle about this, they called it My Title IX Inquisition, and I was, I think, the first person or professor to go public on a Title IX complaint, because you're threatened that if you break confidentiality, you can be charged with more things, such as retaliation. And so I decided to take the risk because, maybe I'm a risk taker, but also I actually thought people should know what's going on behind closed doors.
Maybe, certainly it was a risk that you took, but did you worry about sanctions, consequences, that kind of thing?
I, weighed the cost-benefit, I did a cost-benefit analysis and went for it.
Were there any consequences?
There are always potential consequences which are possibly still unfolding.
Well, that was mysterious. So,
Yes.
see, when you say something mysterious, the guy sitting in this chair
Yeah,
usually thinks,
yeah.
I have to follow up on that. So what does that mean?
Well, there's always the possibility of lawsuits when you write something like this. There's a possibility of other sorts of complaints and charges. And, what I learned from writing this book is that, after that article came out, I got emails from people all over the country who had gone through their own Title IX investigations and who were terrified to speak out publicly because they'd been warned about the consequences if they did, like job loss. So I was in a better position to talk about it because I have tenure and I teach at a research university that I think mostly does support academic freedom. But, the term gag order is not, like a stretch for people in these situations because there can be consequences.
Well, one of the consequences is you've kind of become the central clearinghouse for the kinds of stories that are now on post-secondary campuses all over America.
You should see my email inbox. I mean, it's tragic. Daily I get emails from people brought up on the most absurd sorts of charges.
Give us an example.
Well, I mean, there's a really tragic case of a kid. So I heard from a lot of professors, and I heard also from students, mostly male students, brought up on some charge that they found was specious. So, like, here's an example: an 18-year-old kid who was in a relationship with a girl who was a year older, and they later broke up. And she accused him after the breakup of having. They were in a situation where he asked for oral sex from her maybe twice, and she was kind of not into it and then briefly complied and then stopped, and then later on accused him of non-consensual sex. And he was found guilty by his university of emotional coercion and expelled. And if you're expelled for something like that, you really can't get into another school because all schools ask, have you been expelled for some sort of misconduct? So this kid at age 18, in the context of what I think was really sexual awkwardness and inexperience, as opposed to this kid being a predator, his life is more or less ruined. And what people don't realize when they talk about the sexual assault problem is that the definition of sexual assault has been so expanded and elasticized that a case like that, which is murky, which has a breakup involved, is being prosecuted as sexual assault. And I'll just say one other thing, the gender bias in those kinds of decisions. So a student dean decided that this 18-year-old kid had more emotional power than the woman did in that situation.
Who was older than him.
Who was older. And I mean, I really do think that there's a kind of gender bias sort of baked into these decisions, and that's what really needs to get talked about and isn't.
Do you think that at the bottom of it all, though, there is at least a well-intentioned effort to prevent women from suffering more?
Yes, absolutely. And yes, there is a sexual assault problem on campus. I think that talking in more specifics about what really is happening, because I think there's a myth about these serial predators roaming campuses, stalking freshman women. And I think the reality is you have situations like the one I described where the consent issue is murky. You have an incredible amount of drinking. I mean, drinking to the point of everyone passing out or being comatose, and sex happening under those circumstances. And I think you also do have a level of sex, and I learned about this from talking to my own students, mostly women students, that is just bad sex, where people are having sex that they didn't want to have, that they're coerced or persuaded into having. And I think that women these days in hookup culture are not sufficiently being taught or educated in how to say no or in what they want. And I think there's this collision of kind of this permissive aspect of hookup culture with this new fearfulness and sense of sex as harmful and traumatic. And I think this is resulting in this just expanding number of after the fact accusations that campus administrators are, in good faith, I mean, as you say, trying to adjudicate.
I mean, you call it, you call it hookup culture, but there are many who now call it rape culture. What do you tell us what you think about that appellation?
Yeah, I mean, I think can be a thin dividing line, particularly given the alcohol and the question of consent. So most universities in the U.S. now have policies they call affirmative consent that meaning not saying no isn't enough. There has to be an articulated yes, otherwise it can be prosecuted as assault.
Is that reasonable?
You know, we're people of the world, you know, I mean, sex is not always so straightforward, and, you know, the conditions under which it unfolds aren't always, I think, to both parties, either party, so clear. So I do think there are cases, certainly you have people, usually men, forcing sex on women who don't want it, and in other cases you have somebody who regrets after the fact and presses charges sometimes months or even years later about some, you know, half-remembered episode. Is that fair? I think mostly not.
Here's an excerpt from your book that speaks to this. Most campus rape activists, you write, now argue that rape doesn't require penetration. Focusing on the physical specifics of sexual assault is, quote, archaic and disrespectful to victims. Even shifting the focus from the act to whether it was consented to is problematic, since it puts victims in the position of proving they aren't lying. Where do we want to go here? I mean, the whole idea is to protect women from unwanted sexual advances and from being preyed upon. Obviously, that's what it's all about. Do you think the perverse actual consequence of this is to, well, I should just ask you, what do you think the perverse actual consequence of this is?
The perverse actual consequence, I think, is, well, first, that sex is being criminalized. And so, and, you know, again, it's mostly young men who are being tossed out left and right. And the other perverse unintended effect is that I think women are more and more disempowered and handing over agency to campus administrators. I mean, my feeling as a teacher is that we're not educating students by focusing so much on regulation and punishment and channeling dollars, you know, education dollars toward this justice system, a very unfair justice system on campus. I think these kids are being prosecuted. There isn't due process. There are, you know, half the time people aren't even told what they're supposed to have done. I mean, that was the kid, you know, what I found out about the Title IX process from the inside is, you know, they wouldn't put the charges in writing. You don't know what the evidence is. You know, the term kangaroo court gets used a lot. And, you know, if you're a student going through that process, I mean, I think these people are terrified and, you know, don't know what to do.
You do write in the book, and you really believe that women today have not learned how to say no?
That's really what I found out from both talking to students and also, you know, investigating online what people are writing about their experiences. I think that, you know, partly there's this mythos about hotness, you know, and this idea that what feminism means is women having sex in these kind of impersonal, transactional ways in the same way that guys supposedly do. So there's a lot of mythologies about how people are supposed to act. And I think, you know, part of the problem is that given the amount of drinking, I think a lot of the sex that people are having is just bad sex. You know, if you're a young woman, you're drunk, the guy's drunk, he outweighs you by 80 pounds, he's inexperienced, he's, you know, you're proceeding in some, you know, sexual fashion. I mean, I can't say that that is necessarily not going to be injurious, you know, physically and otherwise. I mean, I think people are in these kind of gross situations, honestly, and there's not a lot of discussion about that.
Well, let's do a little more then, because you do say in the book 44% of students binge drink. And of course, that plays a huge, I mean, it just...
And more in Canada, I'm sure.
Now, why do you say that?
I went to grad school in Canada. I remember the trays of beer coming out.
Where'd you go?
Nova Scotia College of Art.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And all they did was drink out there all the time.
The beer, I mean, amazing.
Well, beer is kind of a way of life in Canada.
Yes.
Anyways, but that, you know, you can imagine hormones plus alcohol plus opportunity plus, you know, no supervision from responsible adults. And boy, I mean, surprise, surprise, stuff happens.
I wanted to look at the drinking from a different angle and not just be censorious. Look, I'm all for drinking all that you want. And, you know, I think that drinking is this conduit to freedom. You know, we all want to feel more free in life, and drinking is one of the ways that
Not too dangerous excess, though, right?
Well, the dangerous excess, I think, is where you get past the point that you can make a decision. And what I was interested in is what purpose did this drinking serve? And we all know that drinking exacerbates like male aggression, and that is a factor in what's called rape culture. But I think the other side of it is that both men and women students in heterosexual situations are acting out respective gender extremes and gender stereotypes. So male aggression, but on the other side, I think female passivity. So I think there's a lot of ambivalence about gender progress, and I think the alcohol has some role in letting people forget gender progress. I mean, drinking causes amnesia, and I think that kids get to, on weekends, have this carnival atmosphere at parties and forget everything that we know about self-awareness. That's the first thing to go. And, the feminist formulation was always like raised consciousness, which is maybe not the most fun thing in the world. So I think people wish to have fun and wish to forget, this raised consciousness
Well, let me
business.
pick up on that, because I want to know how and why it changed. Because, I mean, we're the same generation. When we went to university, I think, sex was seen as kind of a fun thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, nowadays, it's violence, it's dangerous, it's potentially deadly. What happened there?
It's a really good question. And in writing this, started thinking about something that happened in one of my classes where we were talking about a film, and I noticed that the kids were all talking about sex in this way that emphasized danger and risk. And I said something like that. I said, I feel sorry for you guys. When I was in school, we talked more about pleasure than risk. And somebody said, well, yeah, sex can kill you. And I thought about that a lot because I realized that this generation, the millennials, are, for one thing, the first post-AIDS HIV generation. And I think that they really have been schooled in their sex ed classes in a different manner than maybe we were. I mean, I still also do remember, discussing pictures of syphilitic sex organs from my junior high school sex ed classes. So, it's not as though the perils of sex is a new story. But I think this generation has gotten it worse, and I think there's, for some reason, maybe less self-examination and self-awareness on questions of sex than I recall us engaging in.
On Facebook, you posted some weeks back the following. You said, the response so far from my confreres on the left, including the feminist left, has been a bit sparse, which surprises me, though maybe I should be thankful. Has there been more since?
Yeah, there have been some, good reviews that have come out on feminist sites, so I was being premature there. But at the same time, I'm writing in the book about a weird area of academic life, feminist philosophy. So it turns out the people who pressed charges against me were feminist philosophers, and I had taken up the case and written about the case of a male philosopher on our campus who'd been brought up on sexual misconduct charges. So the people who really, really don't like me are feminist philosophers. And so that they have been somewhat unsparing. But again, in public, there's the criticism, and then in private, I get these emails from people saying, I wish I could say publicly what you're saying, but I can't.
Why not?
I'm afraid to.
They're afraid.
They're afraid because everybody wants to be on the right side of rape culture. You don't want to be seen to be supporting predators, certainly. And I think people are really afraid of being dragged through social media and, Twitter flamed. Not everybody is in a secure job position. In the US, half of professors now don't have job security, are not tenure track. I mean, I happen to be, luckily.
If you didn't have tenure, do you think you could have written this book?
I think I would have thought much harder about what the consequences would be. And because people are losing their jobs left and right for such things as telling a joke someone doesn't like in class these days. I mean, the hammer of punishment around sexuality extends to, just missteps about speach. I'm not exaggerating because, like I say, you should see my email inbox.
Well, in fact, you are, you're kind of a self-proclaimed lefty feminist, right? And yet,
Yes.
You're kind of the poster child champion now for a lot of the libertarian and conservative factions that you probably don't want to have anything to do with, but there you are.
This is my plight at the moment, is trying to figure out, I just think the left-right divisions don't make sense anymore on campus because you have these supposed left-wing students. I have a question about that. acting like authoritarians and trying to prohibit free speech and due process, and the expansionism of Title IX, and then you've got the conservative students promoting free speech and due process. And in fact, the people in the U.S. In power who have raised questions about Title IX and about free speech have been conservatives. So it's not that I'm abandoning my principles. I am a leftist feminist, but I'm not making pacts with people that I just don't agree with politically.
Do you? I mean, clearly you would like us. Look, it's a really good book. It's an important book. It's worth reading, whether you agree or disagree with you. It's an important book worth reading. Do you get the feeling though that you're spitting into an awfully big hurricane right now? Because
Ew.
Well, okay. Let me pick a better simile or a better metaphor. Do you get the feeling that you're one lonely voice out there?
I actually do, and I don't want to sound whiny, since I criticize other people for being whiny. But as I mentioned with the email, I mean, there's also a kind of sense of futility and responsibility, but without a real avenue to address this stuff, because so many people are going through these really horrible experiences, and they don't know about the other people going through the horrible experiences. So at least I've been able to say to people writing me, oh, there was a similar case like this somewhere, or now that the book is out and there's a list of these different cases that people wrote me about, people can refer to them.
And what do you hope it can achieve now that it's done?
Well, there just has to be more public discussion, less confidentiality, more transparency, and I really do hope more people are going to come forward and defy this confidentiality strictures who are in a position to. So I, think that conversation has to start.
Do you think it's possible that this current generation of women in post-secondary universities, on post-secondary campuses all over North America, could actually come forward and say, you know what, she's right, we don't need to be infantilized the way you're infantilizing us, and you think you're protecting us, but you're not, and we can actually handle this? I mean, you imagine that happening?
I do, because I've had enough women students write to me, my own students have talked to me about that. I mean, the problem is that the attention is being garnered by the cadre of activists who may not be the majority, but for a variety of reasons, including the Title IX apparatus and the universities having to be in compliance with that. There are these forces converging on the same area, the student activists, the mandate from the federal government, a certain level of sexual hysteria and melodrama around rape culture and this idea of serial predators. So, it is to use another cliche, perfect storm. Yours was better about the spitting in the wind.
Mine was a little more graphic, but
yes.
Okay, perfect storm is okay.
Yeah.
Laura, let's finish up on this. You're a self-proclaimed feminist. A lot of your enemies, is that too strong? A lot of the people who are opposing you right now, opponents, okay, are also self-proclaimed feminists. I don't mean this to sound like a smart aleck question, but how many different kinds of feminists are there in 2017?
There's lots, and we have to talk about feminisms, plural. And my point is that the campus feminism is a form of conservatism, and I think I might have said I've used the term paternalist feminism. So what I think the right doesn't understand is that not all forms of feminism are progressive. There are conservative law and order forms of feminism that are about increasing the power of officialdom on campus and not necessarily in the interest of this, the activist cadre.
Fascinating. So good of you to come up to Toronto and spend some time with us here.
I was so glad to meet you in person.
Ditto. If this is feminism, it's feminism hijacked by melodrama, says the cover of Unwanted Advances, Sexual Paranoia Comes to Campus. Laura Kipnis, great to meet you finally.
You too, thanks.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.